Welcome to the Boneyard. This is a podcast about Mythgard. This is episode 8, Fu's Gold. My name is Flake and I will be your host. I'm joined, as always, by my very capable co-host, Markthius.
At Flake, we are happy to bring you yet another episode of the Boneyard, and we want to start the show by thanking our sponsors, Team Rankstar, Inked Gaming, 98.3 Media, OP Seat, and all you wonderful listeners. Thank you so much for making this possible.
Yeah, and as Mythgard continues to develop its reputation amongst CCG players, it continues to compete with a growing field of other card games. Though the game is still fresh into open beta, questions about the immediate future will have implications for a thriving long game strategy.
And rather than speculating and guess, we will be talking to the CEO himself, Fu, about the state of the game, expectations, as well as future plans for Mythgard.
That's right, so Fu or Fu not, there is no try. Play the music, let's enter the Boneyard. Okay, so we always open with the, I guess, not state of Mythgard, because there's no real meta to report, but we can talk about where the game is going. And I think the best way to approach the state of Mythgard is to discuss it directly with the top dog himself, the CEO of Rhino Games, Peter Hu, aka Fu. Fu, welcome to the show, my friend.
Hey guys, thanks so much for having me on.
Yeah, no worries. And it's great to have you. As always, there was a lot of questions that came in, filtered through the community. Mark and myself, as well as the partners, have always had an open discussion with you and the development team ongoing throughout the alpha process, the closed beta, and now the open beta. So we thank you. But there's a lot of these questions and a little bit of behind the curtain kind of stuff that maybe the community doesn't know. So it's very great. It's very awesome and great to have you on the show so we can sort of remove that veil and talk a little bit more about the game and yourself. And the first question that I usually ask my guests is, what is your background in CCG? Everybody has their own experiences and, a shelf full of Pokemon cards somewhere or something along those lines. So I'm wondering, what is your CCG background?
Man, okay, but before I forget, that's a really clever title for this episode. This is the first thing I heard it. So,
thank you.
Congrats on that. It's funny. All right, sorry, back to the question. My background in CCGs, it's actually not nearly as extensive as some people's. I've pretty much been an MTG purist for a really long time now, since probably 94 or something like that. Yeah, I'm probably old enough to be a lot of people's grandpa in this game. So,
wow.
It's a crazy
oh boy,
and it's something I have to deal with. But yeah, anyway, I started playing MTG that long ago. I sort of experimented with some other games, Rage, LO5R, stuff like that, paper games, and didn't really stick with any of them. Mostly just played MTG with my friends. Did a lot of 2v2, which is one of the reasons why we have a 2v2 version, game like Two-Headed Giant in MTG. And so that's an inspiration. We did a lot of drafting, and I think you'll see like 2v2 drafts and whatnot in Mythgard pretty soon, hopefully.
Yeah, there's a lot of inspiration from just game modes like two-headed giant in Magic. It's something that I've played before as well, and as well as draft. I'm a limited. I'm definitely a fan of limited. If I had the choice, whenever I'm going to my LGS to play cards and play Magic, it's usually I usually gravitate towards whatever events they have around limited, be it draft or sealed. That's usually my jam. Now, you saying that you go all the way back to 94. Are you hiding any of the Power 9 cards anywhere in a binder somewhere?
No. I was too poor to buy cards at the time. And so I don't have hardly any cards from back then. And I didn't keep much of a collection anyway. So yeah, I've got nothing.
Because every time I hear someone who says, "Hey, I started out back in like alpha or beta or revised," and then the first thing I think about is, I'm like, these people are set for life, because a PSA 9.0 Lotus is something that you can actually just go ahead and trade for a Corvette or something like that. It's a nutty economy. Economy is something that we're going to get to a little bit down the line, but you have a very a long time of CCG experience, going back all the way back from playing Magic from 94. That's 26 years now, 25, 26 years. But what made you specifically want to develop your own CCG?
All right. So, I was, ever since back then, even before Chandelar, I don't know if you ever played, I don't think it's actually called Chandelar, but it was like the microprose version of Magic on the computer. But even before then, I was, programming computer games, and I was trying to make my own CCG. I didn't really have the talent to do it at the time, and they're difficult. But it's something that I've always wanted to do, whether because my friends weren't available to play, or because I didn't have those power cards to play with. And on a computer, you can just kind of program them in and get them for yourself. So it's something that I like, sort of whenever I have time off of work, I go and try to boot up a CCG project. It's just, this recurring pattern. And finally, something has happened, and I was able to get one off the ground, which is pretty amazing. Really happy about that. But yeah, it's just something I've always wanted to do because I'm, so in love with the genre.
So what were your first steps? Because you're saying that you finally got one off the ground. Was this the first iteration of a card game in your mind, or was this the ninth rung on the ladder of development, so to speak? Was this something that you worked towards? Was this, where in the process was Mythgard? Was Mythgard is it in its ninth form? And like maybe, that's the one we get to see?
Yeah, I mean, it is definitely one of the later versions. Certainly, like as a game designer playing Magic, you're always kind of looking at things that you might do differently, that you might, I won't be so, arrogant as to say improve, but things that you think you want to try to solve whatever issues you have when you're playing the game with your friends and whatnot. And so there's always things that as a designer you want to try. And I have always been like thinking about and wanting to experiment with. So Mythgard is definitely something that has sort of evolved over a lot of time. But at the same time, when I finally got together with the team now, it was wide open in terms of what we could do. Like one of the things that we really wanted to do was be able to kind of address what a lot of people call the land problem, where in so many Magic games, like you just don't have resources in your hand, and we wanted to, the game is like a non-game, or you get flooded midway through what would have been a great game, and the game doesn't turn out. And not everyone sees that as problems, but we certainly wanted to try something a little bit different to sort of reduce the number of non-games that would occur, especially when you have limited time, you're playing with your friends. You don't really want that to happen. So that was something that like I had some ideas on how to do, but it wasn't until I got together with this current team that we really were able to spend a lot of time like iterating on and trying to find our solution, if you want to call it that, to that issue. And other people have, of course, addressed it in the past with different things like classes and auto incrementing mana and things like that. But we really didn't want to limit deck building. At the same time, we really saw the power of Magic, where you can put a deck together with like any of the cards, mix the different colors and whatnot. And that was something that we really wanted to preserve. Go ahead. Yeah, so I mean, there was just a lot of these sort of problems that we want, or not problems. There were just a lot of things we wanted to do. And as a team, we got together and we really iterated and honed in on all these types of issues in order to make Mythgard.
Mark and I are very much, we're deck builders. We're not necessarily ladder grinders or, top of the heap. And Mark, you could probably talk more about this, about the fact that how much we appreciate that there is no limitations based on faction restrictions or class restrictions to deck building. And Mark and I we're builders, right? We're innovators in that regard. And whether it works or not, it doesn't matter to us. We like the challenge of making something new.
It only has to work once, Flake. That's the key.
Well, that's it. And the fact that you've addressed this by not having that kind of class restriction is very appealing to a broader sense of just those who want to discover what the actual game's like not necessarily the limitations, but the lack of limitations in terms of what you can build. I mean, there's going to be mana restrictions per turn, but in terms of actually having a thematic appeal of a deck, that there's nothing to stop you from really shooting for the moon and going crazy. You want a 6-color deck, go nuts. Just make sure that you burn in the right order and you're fine.
I tried that. It's a disaster.
Did you use the gem cutter spiders, Mark? That's usually how it goes.
That's of course. That's the
Yeah.
You got to get it as large as possible.
Yeah. So get those wicked cool, 12 spiders out for 3, and then you're fine, and everything works out. But that's great to hear. And what's also something that we've really appreciated is just the theme of Mythgard and the lore behind it. And we've played so many games in the past that have that borrow or source their cards and their gameplay from an established lore. For instance, Hearthstone is taken from the World of Warcraft and that. You have Magic, which is its own universe with books and fan fiction and etc. Gwent has the Witcher. Where did Mythgard come from? Like the universe that is Mythgard.
Yeah, that's a good question. So I've always spent my entire life in libraries and have done just a tremendous amount of reading, fantasy, science fiction, whatever. Obviously, movies and comic books and just every other kind of media out there, and games also, like things like the old RPG Shadowrun, which has a lot of the elements that are kind of similar to Mythgard. But we knew right from the beginning that we wanted to do something that wasn't just sort of high fantasy or low fantasy or what have you. And we wanted to create an original IP after spending so much time at Blizzard and seeing the success of building your own IP. And pretty much, everyone that really if you want to create something that people attach to, and you pretty much have to create a world, right, for people to inhabit, something that's really exciting that they can explore, and that's something that we really wanted to do right from the beginning. Actually, also, I think another thing was coming off of Gazillion, where a lot of us had been right before, and having to deal with the Marvel IP and all of the problems of dealing with someone else's world and the control that they have over everything that you do because of it. Those were all sort of reasons why we wanted to create something ourselves. And so Mythgard has a lot of influences from things like American Gods, a bunch of comic books, I don't know if you've heard of Jupiter's Rising. I think that's what it's called.
Yeah, there's a movie that came out about it recently, right?
Oh yeah, really? I hadn't heard that. No, that's a different thing. That's not the Channing Tatum movie.
Oh God, no, not that.
He's an okay dude. If ever he wants to be on the show, he's more than welcome.
No. Yeah, of course. But no, I think this is by I want to say Mark Millar.
Oh, he's an excellent writer.
He's awesome.
He wrote Civil War for Marvel, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah. So anyway, we're drawing inspiration from everything, right? Even I think in one of our press kits, we talked about True Blood on HBO. That sort of urban fantasy, supernatural stuff, which you don't see a lot of in games. It's really weird. You see a lot of sort of modern fantasy in movies, in books, but not in games. And so that was something that we really, really wanted to explore.
Well, the universe that you've established, it kicks off with a really interesting and gripping story mode, right out of the gate, which is really immerses you into that universe. I think you guys did an excellent job of at least, setting the stage for knowing what you're walking into, and the fact that you might have, a badass on a motorcycle hitting the board, and that will be met by a vampire on the other side. So it really is, like you said, something that is not well represented in terms of video games, and from a card game perspective, it's very much different. It seems to just either be very much on the hyper fantasy side or on the very, urban kind of more secular side. But the next thing that I want to get to again is from the community, and the community had a lot of questions for you specifically. And here on the Boneyard, we love our viewers and our listeners, so we want to make sure that they get their voices heard. And this one is from Benzi on Reddit, and he asks, what is the feeling of seeing your game go from idea to open beta? What was that like when you finally, pressed the launch button?
Oh man, it's a really nervous experience. Like, I've been through it many times now, and it's still like nerve-wracking, right? Like, you're putting yourself out there for people to judge, and there's people out there who are very just naturally negative about things, and that that's going to happen. There's a lot of positive people that sort of give you energy to keep going, and that's something to look forward to. So there's just a huge mix of feelings when that happens, and you're always sort of anxious and nervous. And this time around, being the first time that I'm actually the CEO of the company or whatever, all of that was just magnified and amplified by a couple times. So it's crazy. It's an experience.
So from that perspective of seeing it go from beta, and you were there from the get-go. You're the CEO, the founder of Rhino Games, and you had this idea for a game, and you go through the trials and tribulations of making it a reality. Now that we're in a very pivotal point, open beta, this is a game that now is accessible to anybody who wants to play it. If they want to spend money on it, explore it, watch the streams, and take part in the events, it's no big deal. Go for it. There's no restrictions now to play it. Is the growth that you're monitoring for the game, the player base and the let's say the revenue, et cetera, is the growth that you're seeing from alpha to beta on par with your expectations? And this is again a question brought in from Reddit by Mr. Home.
I think that's a really deep question in some ways. And it kind of speaks to the difference between expectations and dreams, right? Like, so whenever you do a project like this, you have dreams of it like being a huge success, like, like Underlords or whatever, right? Or not necessarily Underlords, but like that genre, like where
the auto battlers.
Yeah, the auto battlers where it blows up. That's not really a realistic expectation, but you can't help but to have those dreams. On the flip side, like in terms of the actual numbers we're seeing, they're great. Always with these games, you kind of get you see so many times with games, you release them and you see like an initial spike, and the numbers start going down because the game doesn't necessarily have the legs to hold people. And that's not what we're seeing with Mythgard. Like, despite not spending any money on marketing, really, we have numbers that are really holding steady, sometimes even growing. And that's something that is incredible to see. It's really, really rare. Metrics of how people are engaging with the game are all really good. It makes me really excited for when we finally do start putting more effort into marketing, that the game really has a chance to take off. So those are all like, I'm kind of almost vibrating with excitement for when we get to that point. I don't think it's going to necessarily take too long. Like I said, so many of the initial metrics are really, really good. So I'm looking forward to that.
It's really great to hear, and I'm excited for you. And as someone like myself and Mark, who have really immersed ourselves in the game and the culture and the community, we're all in on this game, and we are very excited to hear from you that you're sharing in our joy of the fact that the game's not. It's not necessarily, the initial spike is there, but it hasn't plateaued nor has it dipped. It's kind of on a steady increase, which is great. I mean, we've seen what card games can do when they really throw coal into the hype machine and go crazy, and then sputter out after a few weeks of flash in the pan kind of impact within the medium. But there's still a lot of competition out there. And it's very ambitious when a card game goes ahead and really tries to make a footprint on the card game medium, when you have card games like Hearthstone, which have been the titan of the genre for 5-6 years now, and you have Magic: The Gathering Arena, which has a seemingly infinite budget and 25 years of history and established player base to draw from. And even beyond that, now you have the announcement of Runeterra, Legends of Runeterra, which came out for like it was like a cup of coffee in terms of how long it was there for people to play. And Runeterra shows up, and Runeterra gets great critical acclaim. Now it's gone for another 6 months to a year while they refine it and do whatever. You're up against these massive, not just wallets of almost seemingly infinite, funds to fund these projects. You guys are a small team, a dedicated team, a great team who put out a phenomenal product. Does it not? What is the intimidation factor for you when you're out there with these leviathans in the sea?
Well, yeah, good question. Even before we started, obviously, we knew about Hearthstone and the resources that Blizzard has to put behind it. We knew that Wizards was going to be working on a digital product, a successor to the Duels of the Planeswalker series and Magic Online. We also knew, even before we started, that Riot had been working on a card game for several years before we even formed this company. So in a sense, we knew that all of that was happening. The Valve announcement with Artifact was a surprise. Like, they were really good at keeping a lid on that.
And I'm sure they were surprised too that it went away.
We shouldn't laugh about that. But.
No, that's kind of that's a gray area. I mean, we always talk about Artifact, but I think the fact about Artifact going away, it surprised a lot of people because it was
a surprise it showed up, and it was a surprise that it left.
Yeah, it was like a self-proclaimed game changer, but that's a whole other discussion, anyways.
Yeah, but so we knew that this was going to happen, that we would be faced with, competition that would have a budget of really 20 to 50 times what we would be putting into it. And you can see that in terms of the production values of some of these games, in terms of, the animations and the VFX and sort of the crazy over the top things, as well as fine details of how polished things like their UI are, and things like that. They just have a lot of people working on it, huge budgets, and the ability to put that behind there. But we also knew that making a CCG, like designing all of the mechanics behind a CCG, is a very difficult thing that is not really influenced by money, right? Like, the quality of the core game design is not something that you can just throw dollars at. And so we had a lot of confidence in our ability as game designers to create a game that would be fundamentally sound and could, on that level, stand up to any of those other products. And eventually, when we developed enough and had enough sort of momentum behind ourselves, we would be able to match them on those other levels, on the visual and audio level, where it is a matter of putting money into it, But if we could get a foothold into this market and start creating some revenue, our plan was just to put that revenue into improving the game. And that's also one of the advantages we have over many of these people, is that our focus is this one game, and everyone in the company is completely focused on making this game as good as it can be. So, I think in many respects, we pay more attention to the community, that sort of interaction, the back and forth of iteration that we spend with our players to make the game better are things that I think most of these other companies can't really match. So I think that's where we have an advantage, and we fully intend on riding that to wherever that takes us.
So with that said, I mean, you look at what you guys have accomplished, and I like that mentality of you can't throw dollars to improve fundamentals of gameplay, and I think that's very, very true. And I think that a fundamentally sound game with great rules, great gameplay, and a functional, system of how you play the game and win the game is vital. That's the linchpin in terms of actually, determining the success of a game. Because look at all the money that was thrown at Artifact, including $1 million tournament that, that's a lot of cash money that essentially solved nothing, because it's still kind of sunk to that degree. But it's funny because a developer like Riot, who also has League of Legends in their back pocket, they can just go ahead, and if Runeterra was just a money pit that made them negative dollars every week, it wouldn't matter to them, because they still have this gigantic vault that is constantly being filled by the world of Legends or League of Legends. And and that's what's interesting to me is I'm glad to hear that there's a philosophy that is more focused on the fact and the reality that a good game is a good game, whether it's funded by a multi-billion-dollar company or if it's funded by a smaller team with a more modest vault of I don't want to say riches, but you know what I mean, to actually to polish that stuff.
I think too many, I'm not going to name names, but I think too many games also focus on the visual rather than the actual playability of the game. So while you might have a visually amazing game, if the game mechanics aren't there, you're not going to keep a good player base,
That's true. Now, that said, what are the marketing strategies? Because you mentioned earlier that you haven't really invested too much from a marketing perspective, but eventually you're going to have to make a splash, or to a degree, or have some kind of coming out party where you're like, here we are Mythgard, and we are a fantastic game as a viable, not necessarily alternative, but as a viable extra game you could play. What's the routine? You're on the diving board. You want to make a splash. Like, how many rotations? What's going on here? What is what's the plan for the springboard?
Yeah, so that's interesting. It's something I'm sure everyone is thinking about to some extent. I think as an indie company making a game with no IP, it's very difficult to sort of get journalists and everyone else to give us page time or screen time or whatever you want to call it. Those things are like, people don't really, or they're not really going to write about the game until like we sort of get to some sort of mass. And so it's, for something like this, it's more about a slow growth. We're still figuring out, like, we started putting a little bit of money into ads to try to figure out like how, what kind of ads are effective and things like that. And as we grow and as we get income, our plan is to put more and more of that into advertising, but not necessarily at this explosive moment in the short term. I think right now we don't have that wouldn't be that effective, like it wouldn't really penetrate into people's minds because we haven't grown that player base. We haven't been around long enough to sort of generate that foundation where after we do a marketing push, there's a momentum that carries us on because there's already so many people that know about it and are excited about it. So for a game like this, it's going to be about making small moves that are correct, spending money like at just the right moment, and just sort of growing it slowly over time. I want to point out like sort of Path of Exile and Grinding Gear games as kind of a model for what something like what we might be able to do in terms of over the course of a few years, like growing our player base, improving the game to the point where like when people first try it, like it's just perfect, right? That's kind of the strategy that we're going for.
So part of the appeal of these games is just the competitive aspect of it and the culture that surrounds esports. And is it esports ready? I mean, that's a common meme. I know that Mark has tossed that one out a lot. Whenever
esports ready.
Esports ready. Whenever there's something that we see in any game, it's like, all right, esports ready.
Whenever you see a bug, esports ready.
Esports ready. Yeah. And it's something that plagues a lot of games. Now, obviously, this is not what we're talking about, but we want to know there are so many people who are hungry for a esports scene, some type of circuit. And I know that, for one reason or another, either you want to be a competitor, a viewer, someone involved in the broadcasting element of it. Esports is now something that has transcended just niche. It is something that is on ESPN. It's something that's all over the place. I think it's an important aspect of any type of card game that puts one person against another person. Looking back to Artifact launched with $1 million tournament as part of their esports package. You had just recently the Mythic Championship 5 that took place in California for Magic the Gathering Arena, and that came with a $750,000 prize purse.
And speaking of esports ready, Flake, did you see what happened at that event? That
yes.
Their challenge client crashed in the middle of the. It was a
multiple
bug.
times.
You're right. It was a bug that everyone's been complaining about for a long time, and it actually happened at one of the events. Where it was like, all right, well, esports ready.
Yeah, well, that was it. Exactly. That's like the worst possible thing to happen. But beyond the bug aspect of esports, Fu, we're all hungry and dying to know what the plans are. And I think that it's very intimidating to sort of slap a $1 million price tag on a tournament, especially for an indie game company. CDPR with Gwent has big tournaments for lots of cash prizes. Same thing with Magic and Wizards of the Coast, and Valve had Artifact, which is $1 million tournament scene. What are the plans for esports with Mythgard, and what is the roadmap for that we can share or that you have envisioned?
So right from the very beginning, before we even started this, we understood esports to be a really important component for any CCG that we would be building. And so just from the game design perspective, we designed a lot of things to make it suitable for esports, like the high skill ceiling for Mythgard, where I think among all of the CCGs out there, Mythgard probably does have one of the highest sort of skill ceilings. It's at the same time, it's pretty easy to follow. Like you can look at a screen of Mythgard and sort of understand the game state. But then going from there to winning requires just a huge amount of correct decision making. Is one of the things I think, like, again, fundamentally makes Mythgard as an esport a possibility. Whereas some games that are just like, very not as skill based or more random really don't even if you put a lot of money behind it, aren't going to thrive on that level. Like the potential just isn't quite there. So I think the game design of Mythgard took that into account, both from a watchability standpoint, because people need to be able to look at the game, watch it, and see what's going on, and also from a play perspective, where you can get really good players that are successful repeatedly in tournaments, is something that's very important. So there, from that level, from that perspective, obviously we had esports in mind. From the perspective of support from the company, we are definitely looking forward to having money tournaments in the future, and putting money into that. And obviously, we're not going to be having $1 million tournaments as an indie game company in the first year. But even now, we're building our sort of in-client tournament system, which is on the close horizon, and we'll start at that point putting together both third-party and first-party tournaments. Pretty soon after that, we'll be looking at putting prize money behind some of those tournaments and just sort of growing that scene from there.
That's very encouraging, and it's very. I think a lot of people are not necessarily as enticing as $1 million price tag on a tournament may seem for the average Joe who's just, like that one round number of $1 million. Cue Dr. Evil, but like it's just it feels like that has now in itself seemed to be just a gimmick in a sense, because I think that whether it's $1 million or $25,000, there's the same drive for people to go ahead and make it happen. And I, for one, encourage you guys greatly to really explore the esports scene. And I know that you guys are already on it, and you've designed the game to really have that in mind. And I like what you said about having skill and the same people, kind of the top tier, make it to these tournaments, because in that case that it's less RNG related and more skill based. So the actual best in the world will be the ones competing. And that's always a fantastic element to developing an esports scene. You want to make sure that these players who are the best in the world are getting the recognition and the shot they deserve. And that's how you develop these players into, characters within the game itself to a degree. From other games that I've done casting for, you see some of the same people show up because of the fact that it's a low RNG environment and these are the best players. But then these players who keep showing up, their personalities are able to develop and they become known within the community. And then you have this heroes versus villains just based on those competitors. So it really adds an extra layer. And, Mark and I have always been fans of esports and calling esports and seeing the competitive element to it. Probably because, Mark, and you could probably confirm this, we're not the best in the world, right, Mark?
Please.
We're not the best in the world.
Yeah. You're 100% right about the skill ceiling on Mythgard. I constantly get boy, if I did that one thing 3 turns ago, I would have won that game, all the time. So
yeah, having that in mind and making sure that you have the best players in the world is important. But I think that it's more a desire, and as cool as having $1 million advertising hitch to it is good and all. I think that you guys can get away with something that's very modest yet well produced. So I encourage you. I support you. I'm here for you if you need any help with that. We're all dying for an esports scene.
Just don't artifact us, okay?
Yeah, exactly. So I got another question from the community. This one's from Heisenberg on Reddit, and Heisenberg asks, how involved are you in the game balance and gameplay related decisions?
I'm pretty involved. The team is essentially 10 people with 9 developers in our San Mateo office. About 5 or so of the devs, including myself, are really into card games. The others are more like casual card game players, right? So for those of us that are just sort of card game geeks, we get together and talk about gameplay and balance and individual card abilities and whatnot, like just all the time. Like every single day we have discussions about balance and gameplay, whether new card ideas or like existing cards, whether they're too strong, what impact the abilities have, are things fun and things like that. It's just a constant. We all work in one room, so would just turn around and talk about it. Like every second would be an exaggeration, but it's constant. It's a lot of fun.
So you're saying that there's sometimes you'll be sitting there, the way I picture is you guys are all up for lunch one day or something like that, and someone just sort of puts down their shawarma and says, "What if there was a card that did this?" Has that ever happened? And you guys have immediately just said, "No, you're a freaking idiot. That's the dumbest idea ever. It would never fly."
I don't think our discussions are quite that antagonistic. But yeah, we and I don't think we've ever gone out for shawarma as a company before.
It's brain food, man. You got to go and make it happen.
I'll get on that right away. But yeah, no, seriously, it happens in the middle of like programming, right? I'll be sitting there writing some code or whatever, and something will like pop into my brain, and I'll turn around and just talk to the entire team. And some people will have headphones on and they'll be, I don't want to be involved in this discussion. Other people will be like, oh yeah, this is something that's really interesting to me, and I'm going to turn around and talk about it. And that's just how it goes. Like, we're just peppered. It's not even just lunch. It's just like all throughout the day.
So what is the process involved with, assessing a card when a community might chirp about it being too powerful? I know that you recently on Discord itself kind of released a little bit of a almost like a presidential statement where you're like, all right, everybody, we hear you. There's no reason to be rude and be jerks about it kind of thing. Like, don't worry about it. We there's a way to approach this. But when people are very vocal about certain cards or certain archetypes or combinations that are establishing themselves as too powerful, how are those nerfs decided, or how are those situations assessed and dealt with? Like, what's the process when something comes up and basically has established itself as problematic?
So one of the first things that we do is just kind of take a step back and tell ourselves not to be too hasty. It's very easy to sort of make knee-jerk reactions before like communities have a chance to sort of figure out the counterplay to, whatever questionable card there may be or combination. And there's a cost to making like sort of knee-jerk changes in that. One, people don't have time to have fun playing these sort of like games are fun when they're a little bit broken, right? Like the whole goal of everyone is to find cool combinations. And, you guys as deck builders know that that's what you're trying to do. You're trying to break the game.
Stretcher.
And that's a lot of, yeah. So
Stretcher, Dragaseeth, Fleeting Thunderbird into...
yeah, it's the fun of the game. And so you don't want to just like destroy that immediately. That would be like really sort of a big misstep to do. You want to make sure that the thing in question you want to make sure it truly is broken, that it's having some sort of negative impact on a lot of the community before you go in and make these types of changes. You don't want to be too slow about it, of course. So a lot of it has to do with like sort of watching games. One of the advantages of Mythgard is right from the very beginning, we built these sort of spectator and game replay tools. We store every single game that gets played. I don't think I think the impression of most players is that every game, especially like every CCG does that. But I honestly don't think most people are storing every single game for data analysis. I think it's not necessarily something that's, trivial to do from a technical perspective, but as really experienced developers, those are types of things that we built in right from the beginning. So we're able to go back, watch games people that call out as being problematic, replay games, do that type of data analysis on them. And so we can kind of get a little statistical perspective of these cards. And at this time, we still don't have, there is so much data, right? That it's not so much the data collection that's a problem, it's the analysis, because analysis is correct analysis is very difficult. And that's something that we are constantly working on. And we've just in this next patch that will be coming out this week, we've built in additional tools for analysis of things that will give us better pictures of what's going on. And so we're really looking forward to getting some of that data and using it to drive our a little bit of our decision making. So part of it is emotional, part of it is being active in the community and seeing people's sort of emotional responses to cards and taking that into account. And part of it is analyzing the hard data and sort of merging those two into deciding what we're going to do.
I've always thought that, there is a knee-jerk reaction from both the community and sometimes even from developers to drop the hammer on particular cards. But in this case, the player base for Mythgard is not enormous. It's still a growing facet of the game. And when somebody, when a portion of the community determines that card X is problematic because it's appearing very often and it's very much an effective card or strategy, then it's immediately branded as OP and needing a nerf. Now, sometimes it's just a matter of people are not ready or willing to break up their own strategies in order to play a counter to a particular card that is problematic. For instance, Orpheum of Horrors, and I know that you've probably heard this 1,000 times already. This is a card that a lot of people, I myself included, have had multiple headaches over, and it's a pain in the ass to deal with. But a lot of the times, it's one of those cards where if you just had a Hecate's Wheel or two, like if you play to counter certain enchantments or whatever, like there are strategies out there that do require the community to actually just rally around countering it and figuring out the proper way to counter it. And sometimes that just comes with time, because if someone discovers a new strategy that's super effective, it's going to take a couple of days to a week for the rest of the world to discover it, counter it, and then it becomes status quo again. And I'm just wondering, in your minds, if there, or in your what you guys at Rhino right now are looking at or considering changing in the near future.
That's great that you brought up Orpheum of Horrors, because I'll talk about that a little bit. So in this patch that's coming up, we're making a very small number of balance changes. Some of it is just based on data, right? Like the paths. I think I recently posted some of the statistics around win rates for paths, and so we're making some adjustments to paths to sort of, for example, Rainbow's End had a really abysmal, relatively speaking, really abysmal win rate when going second. So we're making a few sort of buffs to the pursuit of Rainbow's End, and that'll go out in the next patch. So there's a couple things like that. Orpheum of Horrors is a good example of a card that we don't actually think is particularly broken, but the community has a very emotional response to it. There's some good arguments that, for example, with beginning collections, you don't have a great way to deal with it. On like when you get to higher levels and people have larger collections, it's much easier to build a counter to it. But if you start seeing a bunch of Orpheum decks early on and you don't have the cards to deal with it, that can be very frustrating. So we decided kind of at the last minute to we've been thinking about it for a really long time, and we were going back and forth on whether or not we would make a change to Orpheum. And we kind of we decided, towards the end, that just as it would probably be a good idea to make a change to that card, mostly from the perspective of, like I said, the emotional response of the community. So we did. It's interesting, right? Like the feelings about that are complex, because, like I said, internally we don't think it's necessarily broken, and it feels weird to make a change to a card when that's the case. But this decision was more based on like the health of the community and that early play. So anyway.
So in that regard, I mean, it's maybe not a change that you particularly agree with, but you see the reaction and the community climate, and this is so. In this case, is this more? Is it the change to Orpheum going to be more of an appeasement of like a community demand or community sentiment versus your own personal feelings towards the card? And I mean, it's perfectly fine to do so, and if anything, it shows that there's a sensitivity to community the community's well-being versus your own specific viewpoints.
It's not entirely appeasement, I wouldn't say. I think it's more like an acknowledgement of the argument that the meta, if you will, not that we have like a really hard and set meta, but that the environment in early play, like sort of the lower tiers of the ladder, can be very different and feel different than at the higher tiers, where people are much more equipped to, where they have big collections and they can deal with they can figure out solutions to the problems that other players pose. Whereas early on, that's not nearly the same situation. So that is actually a reality. That's not like purely emotional, right? It's things are different in those different environments, and there has to be some acknowledgement of that. So on the one side, it's the idea that yes, people are having a hard time with it and are complaining about it, but it's also that those complaints are not, completely invalid. That there is a factual difference in what is going on. So that's part of the decision making there.
So there's a sensitivity as well, not just towards the cards and the power level of the cards, but also about the economic model of Mythgard. And there are it's a topic that will haunt every single card game that's out there. And there's every card game that comes in and presents a new economic model or their own economic model will always be held to a gold standard of everybody's own, subjective views as to what is fine, fair, and good for a game and a community. Now, I understand that companies need to be sustainable and profitable, but they also need to implement a economy in a game that allows for free-to-play players to make it feel good to play, and for pay-to-play players to feel like they're getting value from their dollars. Now, what is your particular stance on the current economy? What is going to be changing, if anything? And what are the justifications for the current economic model? Obviously, you guys need to make money. You guys need to actually be able to pay salaries and continue to progress with the game. But there are people out there who feel like it's too difficult to make this happen. And I've heard from the developers' side of things what the arguments are, and I particularly agree with them. But I want just people to know and to feel what your side of the story is on this.
Yeah, what a complex issue, right? On the one side, well, let me back up a little bit.
It's tough, and I completely agree with you, and it's a lot to digest and to sort of bite off and chew on.
Yes.
Let's break. Okay, so I'll break it up to sort of get it a little bit more digestible. We'll start with why. I'll ask you why is the economic model what it is today, and is this a sustainable model for Rhino?
So right from the beginning, sustainability is a major issue. There's no point in putting a huge amount of money and time into a game and a company if you think that you're going to have to shut down in a year or something because you can't pay people's salaries, right? You have to pay for art and music and people's salaries and rent and all that stuff. And I think that hurts the players as well, right? There's no point in players investing their money into a company and into a game, their time and energy into a game, and have it not be sustainable. Like no one is good with that. So sustainability is, of course, a major concern, but it's an equation it's very difficult to solve. If you don't get enough players, at some point, then the company also, or the game also, isn't really that sustainable. So it's really sort of a tightrope and a balancing act. Beyond that, and it ties into economy, is this idea of like, how fast are you acquiring cards, and does that work? And so it's actually, so what we found through our data over the years is that people tend to stop playing when they complete their collection. Probably more than 50% of people almost completely stop playing a game, and losing that chunk of the player base because there's no longer anything to acquire is that's hard, because these sort of multiplayer games require that player base. They require the queues to be healthy, and so that is equally as important as sort of the monetary sustainability of a company, is whether or not the game design is sustainable. And so you can only build so many cards over so much time. And you have to make sure that the acquisition rate of cards is something that works, right? From the perspective of if people get everything too quick, it's kind of like a cheat code. They oftentimes stop playing. Different players do different things. Some players get a whole collection and they experiment and they love the game even more. But just as many, if not more, players simply move on to the next thing that will give them like rewards, if you want to call it that, for playing. So from our perspective, I'm just going to keep moving in terms of sort of the questions about economy. We see at this point, one of the things that we got a lot of our initial complaints when we went into open beta were people who were like, I'm coming to the game. I'm not, I don't feel like I have enough cards. I don't feel like I can make the decks that I can make, so on and so forth. And so one of the experiments we ran was we did this treat code thing, right? We gave people 10 common wild cards, 6 uncommon wild cards, some like rare wild cards, a mythic wild card, some packs, stuff like that, just sort of to juice that economy. And we were tracking the early players and seeing like, does that actually work better for people? And the answer is yes. Like, people do stick around longer if we give them a little bit more at the beginning of the game. And so that led us to the systems that we're building into this next patch that will be coming out this week, which is the faction missions. We're going to give people the opportunity to earn like essentially better rewards early on in the game, where you get a series of missions for every faction, and when you complete them, you get a mythic wildcard for that faction. And not only that, but you'll collect rare wildcards and various other things along the way. And that collection of things, equals quite a lot of, that collection of missions equates to a pretty good boost to that early collection without necessarily affecting too much how long it takes to complete the collection, which again is something that we worry about because people stop playing when they do that. So, that's a balance out. But we have high hopes for, giving people a little bit more at the beginning. They have a chance to experiment. They kind of get a feel for the game and are more likely to sort of understand the depth of the game, which I think something like Mythgard has a lot of depth, and you need to play a little bit more to find that. And so we really want to have things in place to encourage people to do that early play, early exploration. Sorry, I'm going a little long here.
No, go for it. These are questions that are, they're recurring, and a lot of it is because a lot of people don't necessarily have direct access. Well, I don't say don't have direct access, but some people are either intimidated or don't necessarily know that they can kind of find some of these talking points already out there, or just go communicate directly with Rhino about their concerns. So the more you elaborate, the more you talk on this, and the more people who can, come and access the podcast and hear these directly from you, trust me, it's a good thing. So the more you say, the more clarity there is in terms of your vision and Rhino's mission statement and the marching orders and such. So just go for it. Go nuts, my friend. This is your show.
So, so, so again, like it's relatively easy for us to give people a little bit more at the beginning, and what is hard and essentially feels like it's running into that almost unsustainability territory is like making it so that it's much easier to acquire the whole collection long term. Again, that has, we see, really negative impacts on player retention, and so it's something that we are leery of doing too much of, and that includes things like really reducing the price of crafting mythics or something like that. Because if we do that, people will complete their collections that much sooner, and we'll lose a lot of players. Like that's proven out by data. So that those are all important, and like those sort of almost like design systemic concerns are just as much a part of the economy as like how much money the company is making because we're trying to, we're getting people to buy packs or whatever. The other thing that we've seen is like a lot of other companies making CCGs who started out with a very loose economy where they gave too much, and then they had to. One thing that has happened for many CCGs is that they have a very loose early economy. People acquire sort of currency where they no longer have to buy anything. Like the moment you put out an expansion, the completely free to play, the people that are just grinding currency immediately buy this new expansion, and that has its own negative downsides, right? Because to some extent, I think the monetary sustainability of the company depends on the whales, if you will, the people who are willing to spend money, of which is probably less than 5% of the player base. Being there to be like, okay, I want to acquire this collection early. The expansion came out. I want to get all the cards. I want to be able to experiment right away. That sort of those people who are willing to make that purchase, because probably they have, more resources or whatever. That's what sustains the company. So, and the continued production of the game. So if people acquire so much currency that because the economy is just designed in such a way that they do so, then there's really no incentive for people to pay for expansions, and then you start running into the economic sustainability problems. And so companies that do that oftentimes end up changing their economy models like midway through. And that creates a huge amount of backlash from the community. No one ever takes that well. So it's something that we just have to be very careful about. We really don't want to have to backtrack on any of these things. We want to make decisions that aren't, that feel good for the players, but aren't harmful for the long-term sustainability of the game.
So you can confirm that everyone that works at Rhino only owns one Ferrari, not two, right? Because you guys are like, it just seems to me that people don't understand the basics, that there is a fine balance. Like you said, there's this razor's edge that you guys have to balance on, wherein you guys need to be profitable, sustainable, not greedy, also enticing enough for people who want to play the game for free. But there's so many variables that are just dancing around. Like it's like juggling 11 different balls, and you have to make sure that while you're doing it, you got a smile on your face and you're putting out new content. It's like, go ahead and juggle these chainsaws and sing Yankee Doodle Dandy while doing high-end algebra. Like it's just so hard to just get it all done at once that people don't necessarily understand just how much factors into this. That it's not just a matter of you guys being, and I'm quoting some people I've read or heard of, being either out of touch or exceptionally greedy. I don't think that's the case at all. I think that there's just some people out there who might not necessarily be as educated on all the factors that goes into establishing a game's economy. So
yeah, dude, I take the train into work and I haven't been paid in like 3 years now.
Well, yeah, there you go. I mean, like Mark and I put it.
Yes, you've been paid in Mithril.
You're right.
Yeah, what are you talking about? You can have
Yeah.
all the mythic
All the
wild
mythic
cards
you
you want, man.
I think it's also important to well, just the way some people think when they say that a free to play game, they think that, I don't know. I think there's people that think it's free to play. The company has made this game out of the goodness of their heart for all of you to have for free. And then it's like, as soon as the game asks for money, they go, "How dare you? This is a free to play game." It's like, well, I mean, in what world does anybody put something out for free like that and then not at some point need to see a return in order to keep putting money into developing it? So there's that bizarre side that people look at free to play games as it's 100% free and it should not be play to win and it should not be like, there's got to be some sort of pay model somewhere at some point in that game's lifespan.
Thank you guys for getting it.
No, we could, trust me, we completely understand. And I mean, I just want to go on the record, and you can confirm this, Fu. Neither Mark nor I are on the payroll for Rhino. Is this correct?
That's correct.
Okay, so this is all. I mean, I try to be as much of a take a journalistic standpoint when I'm doing interviews, to be as straightforward and unbiased as possible. Obviously, it's not. You can never be completely unbiased. I like what I like and whatnot. But from a perspective of just the sheer data, like you're discussing, you guys need to be sustainable. You guys need to have a model that's that's enticing across various different realms of player, be it whales, free, like purist free to play types, and those in between who might throw down about $50 to $100 a year on a game that they like and whatnot. So
I think that there's a weird stat there that you said though about the fact that statistics show that people stop playing the game once their collection is full. And I think just from a personal standpoint, I look to finish my collection so I could pretty much make whatever deck I want, and then I could, climb the ladder with that. But I would think it's more of, as soon as they complete their collection, there's no reason for them to spend money on the game unless there was an expansion or something like that, or unless you had to pay to enter arenas or something, right? So
on that point, Mark, I think that's because you're part of a small percentage of innovators and creators that are different than no, but this is definitely, I will bet everything, bet the farm I don't have on this. It's that you want the whole collection so that when you have a bright idea, you can go ahead and have the cards together to make that bright idea a reality and then test it. I believe that everyone else who has their full collection or who grinds their full collection, they want that full collection so that if there is a reason to play, they can go ahead and net deck whatever is the coolest thing and play it, and then they're not grinding for that. They want to be on top of things. They want that to get they're playing so that they get their cards, and then that's it. They're out, kind of thing. And maybe that's not the most coherent thought out there, but in my mind it makes sense. But nonetheless, I think that those who have full collections like you're more enticed to play because you have more. You have access to the entire sandbox, right? So you can go ahead and create your own bright and silly ideas.
Yeah. I don't have a full collection, just to be clear. I'm only at 33% with Mythics, so I'm still working my way through that.
I'm getting there. I got, I think I just cracked 50% of Mythics, and I'm at 95% of golds or whatnot. But I mean, you and I, Mark, I play 5 hours a day. So
yeah.
This is my life. This is my passion. Fu, before we sort of wave goodbye and then sort of move on to the extra sauce portion, is there anything that you could drop on us? Any giant bombshells or minor little knowledge grenades that you could toss our way that would be cool to share? Some type of little news, some type of upcoming things that maybe nobody necessarily knows about? Any breaking stories that you can break onto this podcast?
I think we right now, one of the criticisms of the game that that people have is that UI, and we are working really hard and have some great ideas of cleaning that up. So that's one exciting thing. I think the other things people will see in this next patch. So the timing of it, it's not going to be some of it may already be known, but our localization platform where we translate the game to pretty much any language. We have this really incredible. We just built it over the last few weeks. A platform where people can, community members can go in and help translate the game, and we'll have some rewards for them for doing so. But people can translate the game, make it available to other players pretty much right away, and I think that will be one avenue for growth, because there's a lot of players who don't speak English, and making Mythgard accessible to them is going to be a pretty big deal, even just in terms of the multiplicative factor that has on the player base. So that's cool. And then the faction missions, I shared a spoiler. I don't know if you guys saw it, of the faction mission panel.
Yeah, we saw that.
Yeah. So there's a little detail there that not a lot of people caught, in that that background screen is not the typical Living Mountain background. I don't know if you guys noticed that, but we're going to be bringing in new background screens that you're going to be able to select through that thing. It's going to be pretty cool.
Now there's something delicious that we can chew on to sort of wrap up this part.
I can have Orpheum of Horrors as my background.
Well, no, you don't get to choose your own.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
but that's funny.
Mark, you don't need any more enemies. It's all good. All right. Well, that wraps up this segment of the main show, I guess. We've got a lot more to talk to Fu about, things like video games and what his favorite cards are, etc. A bunch of little off the wall stuff, including a few more of your questions from Reddit. So we will get to those in the extra sauce portion, which you can find on teamrankstar.com. Fu, I want to officially thank you for coming onto the show and being so transparent and forthcoming with your answers, and just being all around great guy.
Thanks for having me on, and hello to all the listeners out there. Thanks for playing Mythgard.
Yeah, all four of them will thank you in return for. I'm sure two of which are probably both of Mark and my mom. So they're
my wife and I.
Yes.
Woo, we made it.
We did it. Mark, on a scale of 1 to 5 Orpheum of Horrors, what would you rate the show?
I will give it a 5 out of 5 Orpheum of Horrors, which you can't even have that many in your deck, but I'm going to give it that many.
That's a pretty good rating. All right, Mark, who do we have to thank for this show?
Oh, we'd like to thank all of our sponsors, Inked Gaming, Team Rankstar, 98.3 Media, and OP Seat, and all you beautiful listeners.
Yes, and thanks again, everybody, for listening to the Boneyard podcast. And another special thanks to Fu, that it would be Mr. Peter Hu, the CEO of Rhino Games, for coming on the show and sharing all those juicy nuggets. I am Flake. You can catch me twitch.tv/watchflake, Twitter @watchflake, or Markthius, my lovely co-host, at twitch.tv/Markthius and @Markthius on Twitter. And don't forget, the Moonlight Masquerade is coming up very soon, my friends. Stay tuned for extra sauce. Thank you for listening. This has been the Boneyard Podcast. Adios.